Hello, this is Allison Linney, and I enjoyed presenting to you all today and wanted to follow up on some of the questions that I did not have a chance to answer. Two of them, specifically, that I saw in the chat that we didn't quite have time for. The first is, how do you adjust some of the feedback advice that I'm giving if you're dealing with family or loved ones or people with whom you have an emotional connection? And believe it or not, my advice is really very similar. Sometimes, though, we might need to take a pause and put that much more effort into taking a generous interpretation and remembering that the person probably has no idea how frustrating what they've been doing is, even though you're thinking, but you've been doing it our whole marriage. You've been doing it ever since you were in the third grade, or to your partner who you started your practice with. You've been doing it since we were in medical school. Those are sometimes the stories that we have in our head about the people who are dearest to us. But it's actually in those instances that I find those folks very often don't have any idea how much it's been bothering us. So those are the times where I really make sure that I prepare, that I run my words by someone else, that I do my deep breathing techniques before I go into the conversation, so that I can look at the person and say, hey, I need to talk with you about what's been happening in terms of how we share duties for taking care of dinner. It feels like you rely on me for that. And on the nights when you're responsible for making sure the family eats, it's less nutritious, it's thrown together, it's fast food. Whereas I'm doing everything I can to kind of keep us on our nutrition goals and make sure I do the planning for that. And you make a lot of jokes about how your food is the night that we get fat, and your food is the night where we actually taste food because and my food's not that good. And it's getting kind of old. And honestly, not only is it beginning to really bother me, it also feels like you're just not putting the same amount of time into our family that I am, which I know is a big piece of feedback to give you, but it really is how I'm feeling. And I'm trying to kind of talk myself down from that cliff, but I feel like everyone else gets your time and attention, and we get the last thing from you. And we really agreed this year. Our one sort of New Year's resolution for the family was that we were going to share the meal preparation. I know how good you are at cooking. I know how good you are at making things nutritious and healthy. And it just feels like you always have an excuse and you don't make time for it. And I know it's September and I haven't talked about it in 9 months, but I'm talking about it now. And I know you're frustrated, but I really need for us to figure this out. So that might be a little bit more about how I address it with my partner, my significant other. I can anticipate that they're maybe going to say, oh, I think you're making a big deal out of nothing, or why didn't you say something before now? Or, the kids, they appreciate having something fun to eat. And I might be ready if the person comes in back with me to say, yeah, I get all that. But it feels like what we really agreed to was that we would both put some time and preparation into this. And I don't always want to be the person who has to do the biggest meals, the most complicated ones. I want us to share this better. And it feels like it's not shared. And I got to say, going into this conversation, I was pretty sure you were going to minimize it. And that's part of why I don't talk to you about these things sometimes, because you make it sound like your work's more important than mine, that your time is more valuable. Um, and I admit that you might think I'm making a really big deal out of this, but that's because it's important to me. And then you pause and you have the awkwardness. And let's say that the person looks at you and gets really angry. At that point, you might say, you know what? Having you turn this into a huge battle and start getting frustrated with me and raising your voice, that's the other reason I don't sometimes approach you about these things. I want to be able to have these kind of conversations without it feeling like all the stress you're under, you're taking out on me when you don't like that I brought something to your attention. Pause, stay calm, and keep having the conversation. Keep being prepared for everything that you're afraid the person will say. You know what it is. You know what scares you. You know what they've said before. If you've had this conversation over and over and over again, I want you to write out what you will say each time that they say it, and also write out how you'll stop the conversation. Okay, really, I wanted to have this conversation, but maybe I didn't pick the right time. And so if you could just give it some thought and maybe we could revisit it tomorrow, I'm going to go for a walk because sort of the energy we've got right now is really hard on me. So I want us to take a pause and see if we can come back to it later. Okay, so that was one of the questions, sort of how do you do it when there's a little bit more of an emotional connection or more risk involved in the conversation. And then the second question that I'm really sorry I didn't have time to get to was related to one of the participants asked a question about, I've been told that I look like a woman but sound like a man. And I gave an answer that was around, really specifically around, okay, whatever is the feedback that you're getting, check in with someone else and practice having the conversation. But when I looked back at the Q&A, I realized that another participant was saying to me, but what about the unconscious bias in that? What about expecting women to speak one way and men to speak another? And that's a really fair point, and I'm sorry I didn't have more time to address it. So I thought I'd give it a shot here. Without a doubt, we are still to this day navigating gender bias in every industry and in medicine in totally new and different ways. But the same old story, the issues that the women that I coach and work with are dealing with more and more in some ways. In fact, it almost feels like it's getting worse and it's hard to know why. I won't go into those underlying issues. I will confess that my feedback, though, is always for helping people to find out what is underneath their feedback, what it is they find not as effective about me, even if I disagree with it, even if I think it is connected to bias. I want to know what the feedback is. I want to see and experience, see how people experience me. So absolutely, I believe in a world where women get to be firm and assertive. I'm a woman, and I like to think that I am able to both own femininity in a way that matters to me, but also still be really firm and assertive and address the kinds of conversations that I need to have, including bias when it comes my way. So the first thing I try to do when that's happening is listen for what the feedback is, see if I can really understand it, and then see if I have work that I need to do, but then also do I need to go address what the underlying bias is. So the thing that I find, though, that often happens is that sometimes there is feedback in there for me as a woman that is not just that they're expecting me to be more gentle, more kind, softer in my approach, but rather I've gotten so frustrated that in fact I am delivering in the feedback in a way that is more clipped, more with emotion that's behind it. Oftentimes, because of a lot of the women that I've worked with, especially women surgeons, will say, because it's so frustrating to always be cut off, to not be included in the conversation, to have someone mansplain what you did, or you raise an idea and 20 minutes later someone else raises it and it's the best idea in the room. So I really do understand the reality of all those things. What I'm always trying to find out is it possible that the frustration, the energy around all of that has led me to start delivering my messages in a way that are not as effective as they could be. So it's not that I'm saying that every person who delivers feedback to me is correct. It's just that I want to make sure I can really take a look at myself and see how I show up in a room and how it's working for me. And so that's really the answer that I got to in the live presentation, was how do I figure out how to be a more effective speaker? But if I think I've done all of that and I'm coming across in a way that perhaps is more assertive than some of the women this feedback deliverer is used to, then that's the point at which I might address that underlying bias, where I may say, when I really look at how I handle the meeting, I don't feel like it's any different than what other people are doing in the room. It feels like some of what you're saying to me has more to do with perhaps you're uncomfortable with a woman asserting some of these points of view. And then I might be prepared for the person to say to me, oh, you're just making it about gender or Me Too, or, you always make things that way. That's where I might be prepared to say, I think all of us have things to do to improve in our communication, and I've taken a lot of your feedback very seriously. But I still think there's an underlying standard that you're holding me to that's different than some of our male colleagues. And so while I take your feedback seriously and I've thought hard about my delivery and how I handle situations, I would ask that you also be willing to think about the fact that you are holding me to a different standard or expect me to communicate in an entirely different way than our male partners. Um, and that perhaps there's some work you have to do in terms of thinking about how you receive my messages and how I manage the room. So that's, I hope that feels like that gets to that a little bit more, but it's important to me that you know that I'm not tone deaf to the fact that there are things that female colleagues are managing in every health system that are different. It's true for all of our underrepresented groups, people of color and from other countries than the United States, if the medicine is practiced here, people for whom English is a second language, different religions. We are constantly engaging in what the bias is that's coming our way from the person delivering the feedback. And I do want you to be able to have a conversation about that. But I also want you to be able to hear what it is you're doing that could be, perhaps it is related to gender issues, I'm not sure, but at the end of the day, could it be holding you back regardless of whether or not it has to do with gender? And so that's where I spend my time, male or female, or whether you don't consider yourself on the binary spectrum relative to gender, whatever's going on for you, I always want to make sure that we know what the feedback is and can get some perspectives from people on how we're being heard. Because what I want for you is for you to be heard, for you to be taken as seriously, and for your feedback to be received in a way that gets you the outcomes that you want. And so there have been times where the women colleagues that I've worked with, some of the things that we've worked on have felt like they were grounded in gender. But once we got done doing the work, I believe the women that I coached felt like they ended up with a communication style that felt good to them, that may have started with gender bias, but turned into a delivery style that felt sincere and authentic and true. And most importantly, effective. What I want for all of the physicians that I work with is to get what they want, to get their message across, and to have that happen in a way that's getting them the results and letting them be the kind of leaders in their organizations they want to be. So I hope that does a little bit of a better job. I'm not sure if anyone will actually want or need to watch this video, but it was frustrating to me to run out of time and not have more time to address some of these things. So best of luck to all of you. I'm so grateful for the healthcare that you deliver around the world. If you go to AllisonPartners.com, that's my website, ALLISON Partners, PARTNERS.com. You'll learn a lot more about how we approach our work, but you'll also find a link to our blog. Our blog is called What We're Reading Now. There were a lot of links to that in the presentation that hopefully you've now received access to. But if you go there and search for topics relative to diversity, especially, you will find some other insights I have around how we address topics related to bias, to the racism and the sexism and the other ways that we are still holding back people in our community that are underrepresented. And so if I didn't answer your question here, I might do a better job on our blog relative to those topics. And finally, I really meant what I said in the presentation. Please reach out. You'll find my email address on that site as well, but it's A as in Allison, S as in Sims or Sam, L as in Lenny at AllisonPartners.com. And my phone number is 434-295-9962. If you have any feedback for me based on the presentation I gave today or my follow-up answers to the questions here today, I sure hope you'll share it with me. And most importantly, if I didn't get your questions answered or there's ongoing support or help that you need, I would really welcome the opportunity to connect with any of you. And I'm grateful for everything you're doing out there in the world always, but especially during these very difficult times. And thank you. Thank you to Dr. Payne and to others for inviting me to be a part of your experience today. I hope the rest of your virtual conference is outstanding. Take good care.